Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Janice Klein's Marketing Coordinator for AOE. I am here with Tricia Ladely, who will be presenting today's webinar on Project Management Essentials. Tricia currently serves as Assistant Director for the ACI Foundation and manages the day-to-day operations of its main programs: the Concrete Research Council, the Scholarship Council, and the Strategic Development Council. She began her career as a chemist in the paints and coating industry and then entered the world of research and development, spending 17 years with NOVA Chemicals. At Nova, she led the development and commercialization of a lightweight synthetic aggregate for use in concrete, which introduced her to the industry that she loves. Tricia holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Grove City College, Pennsylvania, and is a certified project management professional through PMI. She is a named inventor on 15 patents and has recently begun a second term as president of the Pittsburgh area chapter of ACI. Wow, that's really accomplished. Good for you. All right, Tricia, I'm going to turn it over to you. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Janice. Thanks, AOE, for the invite to come talk about some project management essentials. So I'm going to share my screen. And we'll get talking. All right. Today, we're going to look at just the highlights of initiating a project, managing your stakeholders, and effectively communicating. I was trained under the Project Management Institute using their globally recognized standard called the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge. This is the 5th edition, and they've moved on to the 6th edition now, but basically it's an ANSI approved document that collects all the good practices for managing whatever type of project you have. It also gives definitions and vocabulary and has a code of ethics that all project managers should abide by. So if we look at a project just generically, there's different pieces to it, like a life cycle. You have initiating, planning, executing is where you're actually carrying out the work. And during that time, you want to monitor and control that your project is going along according to its plan and the scope. And at the end of the project, you actually want to close it formally. You can see the generic phases in the graph here on the right. It shows that a good piece of your project work and life cycle is in all the initiating and planning. If I can make an analogy to painting, you can just go in and start painting a room and be excited to do it, but painting well and having it look right requires prep. And just like that, the project requires a lot of prep on the front end, and the better you do the prep, the better the project will flow from start to finish, and you'll have a good end result. So why it's important to plan and initiate your project well is because the cost of changes as you move along in your project towards completion goes exponential and rises really high. So at the start of your project, risk is highest. You're planning things out. You don't know things. You're defining things and making estimates and assumptions. All of that goes down as you slowly complete all your milestones and head to the end of your project. Like I said, if you want to make a change and catch something, you want to do it at the beginning when the costs are lowest. There are actually many knowledge areas to a project. PMI lists these 10, and we're only going to talk about 3 of them today. So one is project integration, basically starting or initiating your project. Communications, that is vital for all the different pieces. And stakeholder management. So the learning objectives are for you to learn the definition of a project and a project manager. What's the role of a project charter? Have you heard of a project charter before? What does that document do? We want to identify and manage your stakeholders. And we like for effective team communications. So a project is defined by PMI as a temporary endeavor. and it's undertaken to create a unique product, a service, or have a result. You could be building something, you could be redesigning a method to accomplish something, you could be adding a lab. Whatever you're doing, it should have a start and a finish. You do not want a project to start and then never have a formal finish or close. I've been on projects that are like that. Often R&D projects can do that. And it just feels awful when a project kind of dwindles away and doesn't have an official stop. And that's usually because when we were planning in the beginning, we didn't have a clear ending for when we were gonna consider that project successful. Your project manager is just the person assigned by the organization to lead the team, and the project manager is the one responsible for achieving the project objectives and goals. There are a lot of personal skills for an effective project manager, and these a lot of times you learn as you progress in your career. I know I definitely, because I like people and I like talking, thought I was a good communicator, but over my years and working, I've found that communication is really hard, and there's certain things you have to do. You have to be sometimes a better listener to be a good communicator. So your project charter, I had not heard of a charter for a project before PMI. Basically, it's a document that whoever's sponsoring the project, they issue it to formally authorize that existence. And it gives the project manager the authority to apply resources and organize the team members. And so the important pieces of the charter are to define the scope. You not only want to say what the project is going to do, but that scope should also say what the project does not include. You want to commit your financial resources and have some type of scope of this is a $10,000 project or $10 million project. That should be very clear at the beginning. And then you want to actively identify all your stakeholders, whether they work within your company and who's managing the project, or external stakeholders that sometimes are forgotten about. And last, there should be a recognized project manager that's going to be leading the project to its conclusion. The purpose of initiating and having this charter is to align your stakeholders' expectations with the whole purpose of your project. So what you're going to rely on when you start your project is a statement of work, a very good description of what you're doing. It should not be a purchase order. That's a piece of a document to your project, but a statement of work. You might need a business case to see that that project is justified. Any agreements, if you're working with another company, you might want a joint development agreement, or you have contractors or consultants. You're going to have environmental factors no matter where you are. So perhaps you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of potable water, and you need to use salt water for your concrete mixtures. Well, you're going to need some expertise in that and look at the codes and how that's accomplished. And then you should always rely on your organization's assets that they already have. If there's a project management team or someone that's led a similar project, you should ask them to consult or to mentor on that project and get ideas. What did they learn the best in doing a similar type role? Then you're going to use tools and techniques of your judgment, and whatever your facilitation techniques are meetings, brainstorming meetings, scoping, consulting if it's an area you don't have knowledge in. You look at all of that and create your project charter. Here's the typical content. You're going to clearly define who's sponsoring the project. It's going to have a name, and it's going to have a history of what you've set out to do and then any changes along the way. You want clear milestones or phases. If your project's really large, you especially want phases to break it into pieces. And you want to define your scope and your deliverables. Are there any high-level risks? Who are your stakeholders? If you have a customer, it's good to align what their responsibilities are versus your responsibilities. And PMI has signatures to officially start or launch the project. So those are the pieces of all that planning or prep before you actually start running the project. And one of those was stakeholder management. You want to identify your stakeholders, and then you want to actually plan how you manage them, which was something that was new to me. I figured that communicating with our stakeholders was fine and you would know when to do it. But even more than that, the stakeholders are at different levels and engagement in your project. And so I'll show you some tools where you can collect all the stakeholders and what their input is, and then manage them well. So for one, a project stakeholder is any individual, so it's a person, a group, or organization who could be affected or is affected, or very interesting, is perceived to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project. So on the right, you see you could have an owner, an architect, you have customers. One of the examples that made clear to me was if you're gonna put any park in, my borough is doing a new park and pool and skate park for kids. And so the borough is the sponsor, it's gonna use taxpayers' money, but those neighbors are probably gonna be highly interested in the project as a stakeholder and how loud the noise will be when it's open. Are they gonna have any lights shining into their yards? And so they might not have any control or be a sponsor, but they're definitely a stakeholder that should be managed. So what we can do is do a simple table, I call it a register, of each of your stakeholders. You want their name, their contact information, and then you want to know their level of interest. So are they going to be highly interested in your project? Do they not really care? They're kind of neutral, or are they disengaged and not interested? And then you look at that versus their impact. Can they impact the project? Project sponsor who's providing the funding, they have a huge impact, right? Versus maybe those neighbors that don't have a large impact, but they're important and they're going to be really interested in the project. And so anyone that can affect your project in a high degree, you want to manage closely. If they're kind of neutral on your project and objective, medium impact, you want to keep them informed. And if they don't have interest and can impact your project either way, positively or negatively, you just want to monitor those stakeholders. This is a cool tool where you take those stakeholders and you manage them as far as what's their interest level. We've just kind of graphed it now. So you find out the people you want to keep informed versus those that you really need to keep satisfied, like the project sponsor. Those that you want to manage very closely. If you have a consultant working with you on a project, you want to manage them closely and be sure you're aligned on where you're headed. And those that you want to monitor. Another matrix or table that you can do to manage your stakeholders is with your project team or yourself, if it's a small project, you want to look at your different stakeholders and then look at where they currently are. Are they unaware of what's going on? Are they not engaged? Are they neutral? Versus D, which is where you need them to be. That's the desired engagement versus the current engagement. So stakeholder B may be very unaware and you actually need them to be supportive of the project to have it be a success. So you better work with communicating and getting them on board with your project. Someone like the middle stakeholder could be neutral and you just need to get them over to being a little supportive, and others could be supportive and right on line with your expectations and goals of the project. So communication is really key. What % of a project manager's job do you think is spent communicating? It's probably a lot, everyone agreed on that. It's actually 90% or greater. So this is communicating to all levels above, your colleagues and those that are more loosely associated with the project. Communications mean you have talked to folks and have delivered your information timely and appropriately. And communication will go through the entire process. So it's during your planning and collecting of data. You want to create your documents, distribute them. Where are you going to store everything? Is your team going to work on a server that's shared? Are they going to use a Google document drive? Where are we going to retrieve these? Are there confidential information? Do we need management and control of the documents and sign off? And finally, at the end of your project, what are you going to do with all your reports and memos and final disposition of documents? You may have a building that you're turning over to a new owner, and they may need to have the schedule of all the schematics, the list of maintenance that must be done to keep the building healthy. Those are the things that you should be aware of. All the project information needs to be collected and controlled. Now, when we're going through a project, each of us has different personalities, and according to Jerome Kagan's theory, most of us just have an instinctive temperament that we're born with, and that's how we approach difficulty. So when you're communicating with other project members or stakeholders or working with consultants or customers, you need to be aware of your temperament and how you typically just react to difficulty or stress. It may be to just retreat. You want to avoid it. It could be to attack. So where you're very assertive and decisive, or you could be one of those ones that has learned to win through diplomacy. I'll admit, if you don't know what you are, I tend to be very assertive and more direct. And that is not the way to be with every situation or with different temperaments. So as a project manager, communicating with folks and managing stakeholders, you need to learn how to react to all the different circumstances and communication. And if you have someone that's being very assertive, maybe it feels aggressive, maybe that's just their temperament, and you need to learn to work with them or ask questions and get each other on the same page. So good communication means that you've given the information in the right format, at the right time, to the right audience, with the right impact. And effective means you've only given what's needed. So if you're communicating to trustees or sometimes to corporate sponsors, they do not want the very detailed notes of what your project team is doing, right? They want the high level strategic overview. Are you aligned with the scope? Have you come up with any conflicts? Is something going to change the project timeline? And all of those things are items that should be communicated, including if there's a timeline change or there's change, project or scope has drifted, versus customers and then team members. You're likely going to have the most detailed meetings where they're going to see the minute as far as the timing, the cost, invoices, all of that. So just keep in mind, when you communicate to different levels of folks on your project, that you tailor it to what they're most interested in and need to know. So who might be responsible for communicating well? Is it the sender or the receiver? Both of these people actually have equal responsibility I'm going to go back to that slide, sorry. Both of those people have responsibility in the communications channel. So the sender should make sure that they're communicating clearly, that what they've told the person is understood, and they need to actually confirm that it's understood. The receiver's job is to hear and take in what is being said, and then let that sender know that, yes, you are asking for this, or you're saying you want that. If it's not clear, especially with different cultures, you could have a project, people are working on shifts. I've done that, did a scale up, and we were visiting the plant at 2, 3 a.m. in the morning with the night shift, right? Folks are tired and you're there doing something new. So you want your communications to be very clear, and you want to confirm that people are on the same page and they've heard the message. The reason why this can get so complex is there's a basic equation that shows you the amount of paths or channels to communicating. And N is your number of stakeholders, so who's involved, who are the people on the project. And you do this formula. So it could be very small, but if you have 10 stakeholders, it's 45 different lines of communication. If you have 50 stakeholders, you have over 1,000 lines of communication. So it's very easy once you start getting more than a handful of people. And these communication channels include people on the project, the sponsors, and all your stakeholders. So some common sense tips that you're all aware of, but to remind you, listening. You should acknowledge and clarify and confirm what you believe is being communicated. If you have any doubt, make sure you confirm it before moving forward. Meetings should have an agenda. You should start them on time as well as end them on time. And you do want to deal with conflicts and not avoid them, but in a proactive manner. And last, document issues that are under discussion or in dispute between stakeholders. Any issues that come up should be dealt with directly, and they should be communicated to those that are interested as far as your sponsor. What stakeholder does that affect? You should communicate those. If a project isn't going well and you run into something, never ever hide it. Always put it on the table, get it out there as soon as possible, and figure out what you're going to do to solve it. Thank you for your time today. I hope you learned some good lessons in starting a project and managing your stakeholders. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Tricia. We really appreciate that. So if you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
There we go. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Tricia. That was very informative. We really appreciate you sharing with us today. Everyone can view this webinar on our website, aoeteamwebinars.com. Thanks so much, everyone.